The wind, a jagged blade of ice, scoured the skeletal branches of the aspens, leaving them shivering against a sky the color of an old bruise. Alara pulled the threadbare shawl tighter, a futile gesture against the cold that had long since seeped into her bones, stealing the warmth from her marrow. Hunger gnawed, a relentless beast in her hollow belly, but it was the cold, the sheer, crushing weight of winter, that threatened to snuff out the last flicker of her will. She had walked for days, a phantom clinging to the edges of life, her sole companion the bitter memory of what she'd lost. A small cabin, a fleeting hope, a husband swallowed by the river's cruel current. Now only the vast, indifferent landscape stretched before her, a canvas of white and gray, mirroring the desolation within. A wisp of smoke, then another, coiling lazily into the frigid air, drew her eye. A ranch, tucked into a fold of the foothills, a cluster of buildings, a main house, a barn, corrals promised the impossible. Life, warmth, perhaps even sustenance. Desperation, a cold, hard knot in her chest, warred with a pride she could no longer afford. To beg. The word tasted like ash. Yet, the alternative was a silent, frozen end beneath the indifferent stars. She walked, each step an agony, her feet numb stubs within her worn boots, until the scent of wood smoke and livestock became undeniable. A man emerged from the barn, his frame broad and solid against the snow-laden backdrop. He moved with a quiet efficiency, mending a fence post, his hands gloved but still powerful. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 40s, with a face weathered by sun and wind, etched with lines that spoke of a life lived outdoors, untamed by the comforts of town. His hair was streaked with gray, his gaze, when it lifted and snagged on her, was an unsettling blend of sharp assessment and something else, something unreadable. Alara froze, caught, like a deer in a hunter's sight, her throat constricted. To speak, to form the words, felt impossible. Yet, the hunger, the gnawing emptiness, propelled her forward, one halting step at a time. She stopped a respectful distance away, her eyes wide and luminous in her gaunt face, fixed on his. She didn't speak, not yet. The man, Elias, she gathered from the thorn etched into a fence gate, simply watched her, his tools still. There was no pity in his gaze, no immediate judgment, only a deep, unsettling stillness. It was as if he saw not just her ragged clothes or her desperate state, but something beneath, something enduring. The silence stretched, brittle as ice, until Alara, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the wind's low moan, finally managed the words. May I have your scraps, sir?" Her gaze, raw with shame and a terrifying vulnerability, held his. And in that protracted moment, as Elias Thorne looked into her eyes, something shifted. It was not a grand event, no flash of light, but a subtle, profound recognition. He saw the resilience flickering beneath the despair, the fire refusing to be extinguished. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alara felt not entirely invisible. The rancher's silence was not an empty one. It was a heavy, evaluating stillness. His eyes, the color of distant storm clouds, lingered on her face, then swept over her emaciated frame, her tattered clothes, before returning to meet her desperate stare. Alara braced herself for the inevitable dismissal, a curt word, a gesture that would send her back into the indifferent wilderness. Instead, he straightened slowly, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He did not offer pity, nor did he offer immediate charity. "Scraps." His voice was a low rumble, worn smooth like river stones. "What kind of scraps are you looking for, girl?" Alara's breath caught. It was not an outright refusal. Hope, a fragile, tentative thing, unfurled a tiny petal in her chest. Whatever you can spare, sir. For the animals. Or for me." The admission was humbling, yet her voice remained steady, a testament to a stubborn core that refused to break. She had faced worse than this man's quiet scrutiny. He walked toward the main house, not looking back, leaving her to wonder if he was testing her, or simply ignoring her. Then he stopped at the edge of the porch, turning. "I have no need for a beggar, girl, but a worker. There might be work." The offer, though veiled, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. Work. It was not charity, but an exchange. Her dignity, though battered, could remain somewhat intact. "I can work, sir. Anything. I'm strong." The words were an assertion, a promise she would die trying to keep. Elias nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. "The barn," he gestured with a tilt of his chin. "There's a loft warm enough with the livestock below. And a shovel, if you can use it." Within the hour, Alara was mucking stalls, the scent of hay and manure a strange comfort after the biting sterility of the wind. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored them, focusing on the rhythmic scrape of the shovel, the heft of the barrow. Elias watched her for a time, from the doorway of the barn, then from a distance as he tended to his own chores. He said little, his presence a quiet, observing wait. When dusk finally began to paint the sky in hues of purple and deep blue, he appeared at the barn entrance again. He carried a small, steaming tin plate and a tin cup. Without a word, he set them down on an upturned crate near where she was working. Stew, thick with meat and potatoes and strong, black coffee. It was the most glorious meal she had ever seen. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, the warmth spreading through her, chasing away the deep chill. He simply watched her eat, his gaze unreadable, before turning and disappearing into the twilight. That night, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket he'd left on the hay bales, Alara slept soundly for the first time in weeks, the lowing of the cattle a lullaby, the knowledge of work earned and sustenance provided, a small, fragile victory against the encroaching darkness. Elias Thorne had seen something in her gaze, and for now, he had given it a chance to breathe. The days that followed settled into a sparse, disciplined rhythm. Alara worked from dawn till dusk, her body ached, but her spirit, once a flickering ember, now held a steady, if small, flame. She cleaned stalls, fed chickens, hauled firewood, chopped ice from the watering troughs. Elias Thorne spoke little, his instructions clipped, his presence a constant, quiet assessment. He offered no praise, nor any criticism, simply observing her with that same unsettling stillness. Yet his actions spoke volumes. Each evening, a warm meal would appear, sometimes left on the crate, other times on the small, rough-hewn table he'd placed in the barn's corner. Once, he left a pair of sturdy, mended gloves near her sleeping place, a silent acknowledgement of her chapped, raw hands. Alara learned to read him, not through words, but through the tilt of his head, the set of his jaw, the infrequent, almost imperceptible softening of his eyes when she handled a skittish mare with a gentle touch. She began to understand the subtle language of the ranch, the quiet communication between man and beast, the rhythm of the seasons. Elias, for his part, seemed to learn her silent resilience. He saw that she did not shrink from hard labor, that her gaze, though still holding a trace of past sorrow, was now laced with a quiet determination. He saw the strength in her thin arms, the focus in her eyes, the way she never complained, never asked for more than what was offered. The deep snows continued, blanketing the land, isolating the ranch further. The nearest town was days away on horseback, a perilous journey in such conditions. They were two solitary figures against the vast, unforgiving expanse, bound by necessity and the unspoken understanding that had begun to grow between them. Then the storm hit, not a common snowfall, but a blizzard that descended with the fury of a vengeful god. The wind shrieked, a banshee tearing at the sturdy timbers of the barn. Snow piled into drifts, swallowing fences, burying the lower windows of the house. The temperature plummeted to depths that threatened life itself. During the height of the storm, as the cattle huddled together, their breath steaming in the frigid air, a low, ominous howl cut through the wind's roar. Wolves, the pack, driven by hunger, was growing bolder, their gaunt shadows visible sometimes against the whiteout. Elias moved with a grim purpose, checking the integrity of the corrals, ensuring the barn doors were barred. Elara, though gripped by a primal fear, found herself moving in sync with him, fetching his rifle, holding the lantern steady as he secured a loose latch. As the howling grew closer, desperate and hungry, a wild glint in their eyes illuminated by the brief flashes of lightning, Elias paused, his hand resting on the stock of his rifle. His gaze met hers, and for the first time he spoke more than clipped instructions. "They'll be testing us tonight, girl. We stand together or we fall." Elara didn't hesitate. She picked up a heavy pitchfork, its tines gleaming menacingly in the dim light. "Then we stand," she affirmed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her bones. The shared danger, the unspoken trust forged in the heart of the storm, bound them in a way words never could. They stood through the long, harrowing night, a silent vigil against the encroaching wilderness. Elias, a silhouette against the lantern light, took sporadic shots, his aim true even through the driving snow, deterring the most audacious of the wolves. Elara, pitchfork gripped tight, watched the barn doors, her senses heightened, every muscle coiled. She saw the desperation in the wolves' eyes, mirroring the desperation that had once driven her, and a strange, cold resolve settled within her. The sun, when it finally broke through the bruised clouds, painted the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and rose, revealing a silent, blood-flecked expanse where the pack had retreated. Elias lowered his rifle, his shoulders slumping slightly with the release of tension. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her, and a flicker of something akin to respect, even admiration, softened his usually stony features. "You stood your ground," he murmured, the closest he had ever come to praise. Elara felt a deep, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It was not merely the warmth of the newly kindled fire in the house where Elias finally led her, but the warmth of recognition of value. She had faced down fear, not just of the wolves, but of her own collapse, and found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The wonder of that first gaze, the silent understanding that had passed between them, had taken root and begun to blossom. The desolate landscape, once a symbol of her isolation, now felt like a vast, beautiful canvas upon which a new life was being painted. The heavy cloak of winter began its slow, reluctant retreat, replaced by the tentative green of early spring. With the thawing of the land, something within Elara thawed too. Her movements gained a new fluidity, her gaze a quiet confidence. She no longer felt like a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's life, but a part of the ranch, essential and recognized. She took initiative, planning the planting of a small garden, repairing a broken bridle without being asked, her hands, once raw and chapped, now calloused but capable. Elias, still a man of few words, began to share his quiet observations about the land, about the cattle, about the coming season. He consulted her on small matters, his questions implicit invitations to partnership, not demands. The gap between them, once a chasm of desperation and silent judgment, had narrowed to a comfortable, unspoken camaraderie. Elara, who had arrived as a broken waif begging for scraps, had found not charity, but purpose. Not a handout, but a hand reaching out, offering the dignity of work and the quiet warmth of shared resilience. She had found a home not in a place, but in the slow-earned trust of another solitary soul, and in the rediscovery of her own indomitable spirit. She looked out over the ranch, the morning sun warming her face. A quiet strength settled deep in her bones. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer defined her. She was Elara, a woman forged in hardship, standing tall and resolute against the vast, promising sky, no longer afraid to face the coming seasons, no longer alone. The true wonder was not a sudden miracle, but the slow, profound unfolding of human connection and the steadfast triumph of the soul.